Hello, everyone, and welcome to Homelessness in Sacramento, a podcast dedicated to exploring the multifaceted issue of homelessness in our community. My name is Corian, and this is our first and last episode. We'll delve into the challenges faced by our unhoused neighbors, the systematic factors contributing to this crisis, and the efforts underway to provide solutions. We aim to foster understanding, dispel myths, and highlight the actionable steps that can make a difference. Thank you for joining us on a journey towards awareness and change. Today, we'll be talking about the lack of diversity for the homeless resources, more government involvement, and change of negative stereotypes against unhoused individuals. And now we will all, my group mates and I will introduce themselves.
Hi, my name is Jason. I'll be talking about the lack of diversity for homeless resources.
Hi, my name is Sydney, and I will also be talking about the lack of diversity for homeless resources.
Hi, my name is Aman, and we are talking about the more government involvement.
Hi, my name is Evan, and I will also be talking about more government involvement.
Hi, my name is Lynn, and I will be going over the change of negative stereotypes against unhoused individuals.
Hi, my name is Khadija, and today I will be talking about the change of negative stereotypes against unhoused individuals.
For context, there's nearly about 9,000 people living unhoused in Sacramento, and this translates to nearly 16,000 to 20,000 people are experiencing homelessness at this point this year. So, what do you guys think about this? Statistics.
Me personally, I think it's a large, really big issue in Sacramento because everywhere you go, whether it be downtown Sac, Arden, Roseville, um, South Sac, Elk Grove area, which is a newly developed area, as well as Roseville, you see homeless people almost at every corner. So the numbers, they make sense with that large amount of individuals being homeless and unhoused.
Right, right. I also want to point out what you said. Like a lot of these individuals, they also face like many like health issues and drug use, alcohol abuse, and stuff like that. So some of these people that are like on the streets aren't like just like homelessness. They're also like individuals who are facing you know, like issues as well, like health issues and addiction and stuff like that. So that's also something to mention out.
I think these numbers are shocking and really sad. It means that thousands of people in Sacramento don't have a safe place to sleep at night. The fact that 72% are living without any shelter makes it even worse. It shows that homelessness isn't just a small problem, it affects a lot of people out there.
Yeah, honestly, these numbers aren't surprising to me. Every time you go to downtown Sac or somewhere similar to that area, there are thousands. There are always hundreds to thousands of people just sleeping in tents and on the streets. And these people, a lot of them have issues and addictions. So a lot of them simply cannot find housing. And the and I believe that this number could always be lower, but there's not enough being done.
I also agree with what Jason said. Like, a lot of what we see portrayed in the media, especially about homelessness, is that, a lot of people are like addicts. They're, you know, at some point even criminals, or they're violent, or they're stuck in their predicament, or they deserve to be there because they're lazy, they're bums. But I also think we have to put into perspective that, like, not everything we see on social media or in the news is always the full picture, because I was talking with um this one person who was working for a nonprofit that helps homeless people, and what she said to me really opened my eyes, because she said, you know, there are more statistics about homeless people that use addiction as a way to cope with being homeless. Like, they didn't start off as addicts when they were homeless, but they started to use, you know, drugs or alcohol to cope with the fact that they are homeless and they don't have a lot of other choices in life. And they literally have to live off like people's scraps or just trying to survive every day, and they don't get to live, I guess, the normal American life.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that because, like you said, not everybody starts off at like an addict or something like that. Because some people, unfortunately, maybe they ran away from home, maybe they want to get away from an unfortunate situation, but they don't have that financial support, or they don't have that like other families to go like get help. And like in that case, it's not their fault in a way, but partially it's kind of their fault because there's no other ways for some people to deal with being homeless in their situation. So they turn to drugs or alcohol or something of the sort to help them mentally cope with that.
I was gonna
Right,
say something.
right.
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Uh,
No, go ahead.
I
I was just
was gonna mention that during the pandemic, when the times where I were to go outside, I did see a lot of families like living in their cars because they either got evicted from their home because they got laid off, and so that probably added to the numbers of homeless people, and so it added to the number of homeless people and also a lot of homeless children that either that had to live with their parents because they have nowhere else to go, and during that time a lot of people couldn't find jobs or even work.
Yeah, to add on to what Corey said, like especially with students, college students, like when they didn't have jobs, especially a lot of those who live off campus, it was harder for them during the pandemic as well because their only other source of income was either financial aid or having to work. And not being able to work and pay rent and bills and stuff caused a lot of the like college student population to go unhoused, to be homeless. They would either live in cars, live in tents, or like be out on the streets, which is really dangerous for like young students, for college students like that.
I also want to ask you guys' opinion upon this as well. Based on the article sacramentostepsforward.org, article Million Dollar Murray, there was a loss of massive federal funds on specific individuals facing chronic homelessness rather than investing monies into programs to help mass population of homeless. So how do you guys feel about that? That our mass federal funds are being used inefficiently to aid these homeless individuals?
well, I personally think that not necessarily that it's a waste, because it is good that people are getting the medical help and the financial help that they need, but it's a sort of inefficient way to help somebody, because it's like you're helping like a small portion of the homeless population, and you're investing so much into maybe like 10 individuals out of the hundreds and millions of people that are go homeless every year. And it's like you're spending so much money on these people, this small amount of people. And one article put in the way of like these, like, say for example 10 people that the government is investing so much money in, I guess, trying to transform them out of homelessness. They're gonna be the new poster children for the government to say, hey, these are, you know, post homeless success stories. You know, they made it out, and what we're doing is helping them, because these people are success stories, and yet we ignore the hundreds of millions of people who cannot be helped. We ignore the nonprofits that are chronically running out of money because, you know, there's not enough funding or there's not enough like they're not able to fund the programs that they need in time to help people. You know, um like somebody that we've interviewed has said, like the wait lists get too long, and the wait, like it becomes too much, and they need something now. They need something to sustain them now. And if the funds aren't there, then people cannot be helped. And I feel like somebody I talked to recently also said that a lot of what there's this scarcity mindset in America, and especially in our government, where if you cannot pull yourself up by your bootstraps, basically, like if you cannot get yourself out of your predicament, you deserve to be in your predicament. And I would like to ask, like, what do you guys think about that mindset?
I'm not gonna lie, like from personal experience, like at one point in my family situation, I thought my best decision was to run away. But then when I looked at the reality of it after I had done it, like I saw so many homeless people. There was tons of them. And it wasn't their fault. Like when I was sitting down with them and talking to them, they were telling me their stories. Like it wasn't their fault that they became homeless, you know? Like their situation was caused by multiple things. And not being able to get that help as soon as possible, not being able to get those fundings and like like support, it caused them to stay homeless for multiple years. And like these people, they hide out in places in hopes that they don't get like caught by the police and like to get told to get moved along somewhere else because there's nowhere else for them to go. Like for me, I was scared shitless. Girl, I went back home. But it's just that type of situation where you won't realize until you're in it. Like your eyes open and things change. Like your perspective is set different now. But a lot of people, they have these prejudice where they think, like you said, Sydney, where they think homeless people deserve to be homeless because they put themselves in this situation and they can't get their my apologies for for my language, but they can't get their shit together. And a lot of people have that prejudice and think you deserve to be homeless. You deserve to not have a home, to be on the streets, which in a lot of cases they don't deserve it. It's not their fault.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Lynn. There's this individualist mindset in America where if someone else is having a problem, it's not your problem. So the easiest route is to blame the other person without thinking of what they might be going through. So if something bad's happening to you, it must be your own fault. But I've found that that mindset is self-destructive. So so people who are homeless will stay homeless because others are not willing to help them. And if others are not willing to help them, then the amount of homeless people just keep growing and growing because homeless new people are being unhoused, and still those previous who were already on the streets stay on the streets.
I agree with like all of you guys' points when it comes to the mentality, and I think like this that mentality is kind of like old school. I think, especially where we're going, we need to have a different mindset when it comes to problems, specifically with homelessness as well. That uh, it's not like it's that person's fault. There's so many issues, and how we need to address them. We have to address the issue in a wider term than just saying there, like what Lynn said, there could be so many um there's so many problems and so many reasons why someone could be homeless, and it's not because of one singular reason, but it's multiple that are just compiling on top of each other. So I think to move forward as a society, we have to think bigger. We have to be more empathetic. We have to be more understanding in order for us to solve this problem.
Right. I completely agree with what, everything that has been said so far. And I really appreciate that you guys, especially like Lynn's personal anecdote, was really striking as well. And, how I do agree that there is this very like individualistic ideal in America, especially. And there's this whole like apathy towards people who are struggling, because I think a lot of people don't want to recognize that America is struggling. We're all struggling, and yet we act like we cannot empathize with, you know, other people that are struggling worse than us. It's like a competition almost. Like who has it worse? Who has it best? And with that being said, I would like to bring another statistic from the Sacramento County website. This is the report from last year, the report on homelessness. And it says, and I quote, overall, the county of Sacramento is investing more than 220 million on program services and solutions for homelessness, end quote. And 50% of that funding actually comes from the state, whereas 25 of the money invested in homelessness and programs and services comes from the county's general fund. So it does seem like a lot of the homelessness funding comes from the state directly, or the entire country basically. And according to the city of Sacramento, there are actually 13 current sites and programs that are specifically dedicated to housing unhoused individuals, and some are divided by types of population. For example, some are women only, some are co-ed adults, some are youth, some are specifically for families. And I would like your guys' thoughts on that.
Like, okay, when you said, Sydney, like when you said like a lot of it comes from state and county funding, like my first thought was, what about federal funding? Like homelessness, not just in Sacramento, not just in California, all over the country is an issue. The whole country of America. And the fact that like nothing is said about federal funding that comes from the country itself, that we as taxpayers like pay for as well. Like none of it goes to help those individuals who are in need is astounding. It's profound. Like it's, to me, really dumb, because if this money has to come out of the state's pockets and like the county's pockets, what about, because I know for a fact this, like the government of the United States, they have money and they're using that to pay themselves instead of giving back to the people of America. And like they need it. They really need that help. But the fact, like I said, or like the fact that we have to pay out of pocket in our state, in our county, to help people, it's just, that's crazy to me. I don't know.
To talk about what is being said, um, when it comes to funding, I've been into like some council meetings for another class, and people literally have to beg the counselor, like the city councilors, to put funding into homelessness programs and to things to help the city of Sacramento be better, so you have less homeless on the streets, less violence, less um, you know negative things, so that people can walk their kids in downtown area, right? These people would beg for it, and these city councilors don't, they either don't vote for on it or they take too long. And it's bizarre to kind of just sit there and watch them, like like what's the best way to put it, like just not listen, but then they just act upon it like way later down the line, when it's already like this year is like probably it's doubled in the amount of homeless people, and then by the time they act upon it, it's going to be like quadruple. So it's like they're helping, but they're doing it so slowly that it's like it's becoming worse because of it.
Like what you said, Corey, like I love the way you worded that because at the same time, they're taking so long. When they actually help, it's just too late. It's too late to like prevent it because they already messed up by taking that long, like over many years to actually help them to vote on that funding and give it to the people who are in need and need it.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you guys on the whole the government is not efficiently providing the funds for to tackle homelessness as an entire issue. One of the board members of a nonprofit organization for homelessness that I talked to, she said something along the lines of the funding is on its way, but it's not on its way fast enough to help people that need the help now. So then the organizations aren't being federally funded fast enough, so then they have to bring money out of their own pocket, out of their own means to help the people within their local jurisdictions. And by the time the federal funding comes, it's already too late. And now they have to, find out where to put that money, how to use that money. And it's just this complex way to get help for something that should almost be a no-brainer to find a solution to, if that makes sense. Something else that I would like to touch base upon is the fact that, according to the Sacramento County, there are actually some resources that they have listed for homeless individuals to get help. There's an icon that reads general shelter needs, but this one you have to contact people for, and you have to contact a number, you have to contact an email. And there's also the emergency family shelter, which unfortunately is discontinued, and yet they still have it up. I think you're supposed to get redirected. There's transitional aged youth, and for this is a drop-in center. There's also substance abuse and mental health services, and then there's a link, but it just takes you to this website where basically you have 10, I guess, centers or services programs to choose from, and I'm assuming they have their own registration process. And then the last one is affordable housing, but of course it's another kind of drop in link where you click on it and then it takes you to another link, which takes you to another link, I'm assuming. So it just seems like a very complicated process almost. I would like you guys' how does that make you guys feel?
I feel
Like,
like it's a way too
oh my
tedious
God.
process to get actual help you need if you're homeless. Because as you said, all these organizations and like nonprofits that help homeless people, a lot of them are s- a lot of them are slow to act, and it's mainly a funding thing because if they don't have funding, they can't help people.
I was gonna add on that like we also have to keep in mind that a large population of these unhoused individuals, they don't have access to internet. They don't have access to phones. They don't have access to these devices that can get them connected to resources that can help them, which I think is there's a word for it, but which I think is kind of redundant because how are these individuals going to contact like for help that they need help when they don't even have the resources to contact them?
Exactly. Exactly. And I think I forgot. I think it was Corey's interview, and I just briefly, um, I skimmed through it, but something about the whole waitlisting issue with homeless resources and how the help isn't there's not enough room, there's not enough help to help everybody out there. And of course, like, Jason's mentioned before, everybody has such diverse needs that it's like there is no one solution to homelessness. There is no one catch all for everybody. There's no one savior for homelessness. And it's I think it also that I think that's why people fixate so much on, you know, one single solution is because they hope for one single solution to help everybody who's homeless. And unfortunately, that's not the case. But I think it's such a sad and tragic predicament to be in if, you know, I was homeless and say I had specific needs and yet I have to be waitlisted to get those needs. It's I don't like it. It would just stress me out so much. I literally wouldn't know what to do. It's so debilitating.
To add on to what Sydney said about the interview I conducted, that interview was from my father at the time, and he was around like 20, so like early 20s, and he said that it was the reason why he got waitlisted was because he was a young man in his 20s and there were more priority, like seniors, women, and children that needed priority first. So he instead of just sitting there waiting for it, he would rather have someone else take his place because they probably need it more than he did. So he seeked out other ways to do it, but seeking out other types of help, it either was really bad experience, like a negative experience, or it was very awkward to ask for help because sometimes people can get a little weird when you ask for help. So, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Does anybody have anything else to add or to comment on?
No, I think me personally, I think I said everything that needs to be said about this specific topic. I don't know about anybody else. You guys can voice your opinions.
On to our next topic, more government involvement. I am Evan Pan,
I am Aman.
and the article that I studied showed that the overturning, the ruling in case Grant Pass v. Johnson, this ruling by the Supreme Court of the United States of America, it's overturned so many protections for homeless people and unhoused people. And I'm just going to say it how it is. The government is acting against the interests of homeless people because after this ruling, there have been so many crackdowns on homeless camps and sweeping, which is getting rid of homeless people's encampments along with all of their belongings and leaving them with almost nothing, including their birth certificates and all of their savings. It's just going to be gone. And police have also not helped this issue because police have been issuing citations to homeless people, and we all know that's not helping anything. So I just want to know what your guys' thoughts on this problem is.
Yeah, I want to add on to that. Oh, I interviewed the lady I interviewed, and she said that the government, mainly the police, doesn't help a lot of them because when like some people are on the street homeless and the neighbors call the cops that they don't want a homeless on their street, and then just cops come and they just sweep them out rather than just giving them a shelter or guiding them to the shelter houses. So, what do you guys think?
think that what you said was pretty accurate to what my interview also mentioned too. I interviewed one of my person that works by the church that he basically gives out food to homeless individual, and he recalled that he's seen like authorities not really assisting homeless people needs. He described to me that he noticed that these law enforcers weren't really prioritizing these homeless individuals, and he told me that was really messed up because he noticed that they were like having some type of medical issue, but these law enforcers were just neglecting them. They were just like just disregarding it. And I was like, me and him were just like really like astonished by that. So I don't know if you guys experienced seeing something like that, but my interviewer he explained to me something like that, and I just found it pretty messed up.
Yeah, I want to add on to that. Like with my interview, I interviewed the homeless advocates at Sac State. So they're like a club at Sac State that advocates for homelessness. And they talked a lot about like they were super critical about how specifically in Sacramento, the government's approach, how like they did so many encampment sweeps and that they would arrest and like for people who had mental illnesses and it was troubling for them to like cooperate, they would be like arrested and stuff. Like for my interviewees, like they were really advocating for like housing first approaches and stuff instead of like just taking them off of where they felt comfortable and making them move to somewhere else and eventually they would just come back and like live in the same spot. And it would be like a perpetual cycle where they would get kicked out by the police and then leave and then end up coming back.
Yeah, on that note, I read an interview about this lady who's been homeless for several years. Um, she she says how the police on multiple occasions came in, they continuously escorted her off wherever she was staying and gave her nowhere else to go, and on some occasions they would sweep her tent along with a ton of her belongings, so she lost a lot of her stuff through police action against homelessness. And I just want to know what you guys think about that, because that has happened to countless homeless people throughout the state, and specifically in Sacramento, because in Sacramento it's gotten really bad.
Uh, I remember there. I used to ski an encampment almost like every Friday, um, just doing like grocery shopping. I would always see it when passing by, and I remember one day I just saw it. It was like completely cleared out. There was like no one there anymore. It looked like they like hosed it down with like water and things like that, and it was just completely empty and vacant. And going around downtown and like experiencing the homeless people kind of interacting with the police, it was always negative. It was never positive. That it was always some type of confrontation because the homeless people feel threatened. They feel like they're a subspecies when it comes to being treated with respect and dignity, and how they're kind of treated by these police officers. It just doesn't help. Like as many of you said, it just doesn't help.
Yeah, I completely agree that a lot of times homeless citizens are not treated like citizens. You know, they're not treated as people. They're treated as lesser than. And I also would like to comment on the whole cleaning up of downtown and streets in general. I think what is it? Because when I drive to Sac State, I pass by this like little encampment area. It used to be like a little like um encampment village. It was by like Franklin and like 24th, I think. And I think because they're doing construction now, so for the past couple of weeks they've been doing construction. But I remember before that there was a couple tents in the area, and one day I just drove by and all of a sudden like no more tents, and it was just basically construction because they were starting construction. And it's just crazy to see how normalized that is. Because if you put it into the perspective that that's their home, and if you think about, for example, our own homes, our own apartments, our own houses, like if I was kicked out of my house and my house was demolished in one day, like that would make me spiral. And it's just so crazy how it's normalized because they're homeless people and they're seen as less than. Then it's like, oh, it's okay, you know, but it's not really okay. And I also would like to add to that because one of the professors I interviewed recently, he's been researching homelessness for about a decade now, and what he mentioned is actually really on par with this topic because he mentioned that some solutions for homelessness are more about aesthetics rather than helping homeless people. And an example he gave was the cleanups of encampments downtown, especially. Because people want downtown to look nicer, and yet what we're doing is we're kicking out homeless people. We're not necessarily giving them a means of stability, and like more housing or stable income. We're just kicking them out and moving them further down somewhere else where people won't see them, you know, just so that the aesthetics of downtown can be nicer.
Uh,
Um,
sorry, you can go.
I think that just removing homeless people from the streets doesn't solve the problem. It only moves them to other places and make it harder for them to get help. People lose, just like Sydney said, it's a house for them. They keep everything there, and removing them from there would just make it worse. You just make it harder for them to find another place to stay in.
Not to mention, they need to spend more money on getting essential items that were thrown away back, such as tents and other gear that might have been inside their tents.
To comment on what Sydney said about aesthetics. I don't know why, but the word aesthetics, when it comes to like helping homeless, uh, when it comes to that, it kind of irritates me at a certain level because they're worried about something that is so superficial, to me at least, that it's so there's a whole human being in front of you that needs help, that needs support, and you're worried about how the sidewalk looks. That just makes me angry.
I really appreciate that you mentioned that because I think essentially that's what I'm trying to get to as well. But I don't know if you guys remember, but there was a trend, especially like I think once COVID started to like the the pandemic started to kind of like the restrictions alleviate a little bit, and there was this trend to record yourself giving things to homeless people, giving money to homeless people or giving them like goodies basically. And basically what we learned from that whole interaction was that a lot of the times the interactions with these homeless people were recorded and they were fake, very fake. And I feel like every time I think about how that was a trend and people thought that that was a cool thing to do and not a genuine thing to do, it just makes this whole it just feeds the whole idea that homeless people are not important, that they're exploitable, because they're easy targets. And I feel like that's such a nasty way to go about thinking about another human being, is that they're exploitable. And unfortunately, that's a part of the society that we live in today. And, if anybody has
And
any
I want
thoughts,
to
go
add
ahead.
on. Oh my bad. I want to add on to what you said about like how people would go up to them and record them and stuff because like you said there were so many trends about like either messing with homeless people or trying to like show empathy for them, but then there's this one trend that happened a while back ago around the time of the pandemic where there people would go around messing with food and then giving it to the homeless people. Like they would like refill the Oreos with toothpaste instead of the original Oreo filling, and it would like cause them to go to hospitals and stuff. And they would like dangerously mess around with the foods that they would give homeless people in quote unquote acts of kindness. under the guise of like, oh, I'm being a good person, I'm giving it to them, but they're tampering with the food. And not only is that dangerous, it's it's ignorant. It's acting as if they're less than human, but like pieces of content and like something to like look at and laugh about because you messed with their food and made them go to the hospital. Like like to make them a source of entertainment when their situation is something of like seriousness, it's just it's so dumb, it's so ignorant, it's like rude. You're not thinking of these people as human. Like you're just thinking of them as something like to laugh about as a source of entertainment.
I agree to everybody's like how everybody said, but the based on like how everybody stated that the Sacramento homelessness more get worse in the downtown, and I want to add on to that. I interviewed a lady and she was like the manager at the Department of Homeless Services and Housing. And she mentioned that it gets worse to the downtown because there's no like homeless shelters for people that they can go there. Because mostly when like there's a lot of homeless over there and then police came and they just sweep them out to go somewhere else rather than them moving to that. And she mentioned that the government is not helping them with like the funding and not giving them like the more opportunity to build more like shelters that people can live there because there's very less shelters near the downtown and they're already full. And I think like government can like utilize like the federal and state funding in alignments with existing homeless plans and making publicly owned land available for affordable housing. What do you guys think on that?
On the topic of shelters, um, the government does not put enough money or care into homeless shelters because homeless shelters have been known to just be like these black holes where homeless people can just stay and then just go back right back onto the streets. They do not help at all, and they're known to be dangerous because there have been gang affiliations there. There's been a drug problem. There's been all these types of issues with homeless shelters that have not been addressed by the government.
Yeah, I want to add on to that. Because also there's this like prejudice where like a lot of people who live in the same area as where like they're opening up homeless shelters. Like for example, me, I live in like South Sac, so and they're trying to open up a homeless shelter down the street, but like hella people are like opposed to it because they're scared like oh it's gonna bring like bad people around and whatnot, and like also they think of like homeless shelters as like dirty and stuff, and like they're not really like you said, Evan, like they're not helping anybody. Like they're just gonna go back out on the streets again, yada yada yada. But like at the same time, like these people's like who lives in the neighborhood, their prejudice affects whether or not there will be a homeless shelter opening up. And that's also an issue because if they don't have these homeless shelters, where else are they gonna go? Back onto the streets? And the turnover rate for people that end up in homeless shelters and leave is like I don't know the like specific numbers for it, but like it's a lot. And like they end up going back out onto the streets again. Which is like you said, like that's what people already think of them. Like they're just gonna go back out, which is dangerous because they're trying to get help, but then they're ending up being like kicked out and stuff because like people deem like, oh, you don't need help anymore. And then the people around it that live near homeless shelters think that, oh, this is like we already knew this was gonna happen. Like you should have never opened up the homeless shelter near us anyways, like da 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 and stuff like that.
I think I want to add on to that, like you just said that like people go back to the streets, like even though there's like shelters. I think people mostly go back because they don't get enough like care, like what they need and what they want. They don't get enough care in the homeless shelter. Like government don't like put like enough funding that people can get like enough care. They can get enough food, like a Medicare and everything. And I think it that also mostly affect like why people go back to the street.
Yeah, I agree with every that everything that you guys have said, and I would like to touch base on what Evan said earlier about, the homeless shelters not being really ideal conditions for people to live in, you know, and I think it's because, well, I've never been to a homeless shelter in person, but I've heard stories where people have talked to reporters and they said things like, oh, the shelters, the homeless shelters in certain areas are actually low quality. The help is low quality, and it's like we're mass producing these shelters, but the quality is so low. The quality is bare minimum, and it's like a lot of homeless people don't feel safe. They feel safer sleeping on the streets than sleeping in a shelter on a bed. And I think that says a lot about the quality and the safety surrounding, our current homeless shelters. Because, an issue was privacy. A lot of homeless individuals who go to shelters to sleep, they don't have a lot of privacy because you're either rooming with somebody who you complete stranger, or you're rooming with people who have, you know, diverse issues. And I feel like that's basically kind of like, I want to say, like roommate roulette. You really never know who you're gonna get, and you don't know how long they're staying for. You don't even know how long you're staying for. So it's like it's essentially a very terrifying predicament to be in. Because like, yeah, you get food, yeah, you get a shower, yeah, you have a bed, but do you feel safe ultimately? Like, how much control of your safety can you have? I think that's something that I don't really think about because I've never been in that predicament, but it just really opens my eyes to see that, like, it really, like, this whole issue is just way bigger than I think a lot of us can imagine.
And that's not even going over how unsanitary a lot of these homeless shelters are, because they're bad places. They do not take into account the kind of illnesses and how run down a lot of these places that were set up by the state are.
Okay, moving on to the next part, change of negative stereotypes against unhoused individuals. Based on my research, I want to talk about why many of the stereotypes aren't true. People often have negative stereotypes about unhoused individuals, but many of these beliefs are not true. This is the same thing one of my interviewees said when she was experiencing homelessness for almost 20 years of her life. That one of the main stereotypes people have about homelessness is that homelessness happens because of laziness or bad choices, but in reality things like losing a job or not being able to afford housing are big reasons why people end up without a home. Another common stereotype is that all homeless people struggle with mental illness or addiction, which isn't always the case and just adds to the stigma. Many people also assume that homeless individuals are dangerous or involved in crime, which causes them to be watched and controlled by police more than others. And some believe that once someone is homeless, they will always be homeless, but many people experience it only for a short time before getting back on their feet. And then lastly, people think that homeless individuals refuse help, but in reality, there are often strict rules that make it hard to qualify for assistance, or they may not trust the system because of past negative experiences. Anybody wanna add anything up to that?
Yeah, like what we mentioned earlier when we were talking about what Corey's interview with his dad and what Cindy said earlier as well, that there are so many like long lines for people to get into these homeless shelters or like aid. And at some point, people think these lines are so long that they'd rather let it like go to somebody else that needs the help more, or that they think these lines are so long, there's no point in actually trying to get help. Um, but yeah, that's what I think.
Add on, I talked to my father later after the interview. I wasn't like writing this down, but he just wanted to talk again. He talked about how the stereotypes that particularly of his age group, how he was lazy and how he was, you know, just not willing to work was kind of like the opposite of that. He just needed like a chance to find a job and to start working, but since he was homeless, it took him a while to find a job. And then and if him and his friends that were homeless, they tried to get help, they were treated very weirdly uh, by female staff because it was like a weird. It made them very uncomfortable the way they were acting towards them, and so the stereotype there, because my dad is my dad and his friends are black men, so the stereotype it just went further and it just got weird, and so that's why my father had a lot of trouble asking for help because he didn't know if they were just gonna turn him away, they're gonna act weird towards him, um, or some people would just be mean to him because he's obviously he's lazy or obviously he's a drug addict or something like that, and it's like that's not even close to what the truth is.
Yeah, that kind of just solidifies how a lot of negative stereotypes about homeless people have real world consequences on how it affects their life and how other people view them, and how other people view them has a big impact on what kind of services they're likely going to get and the quality of the services that they get.
And
Yeah, and
also,
like
oh,
moving on to
you go,
sorry.
you go, you go. You're cooking. You can go, you can go.
Oh no, I was gonna move on to my research, but you can go first. Go first. Yeah.
I just want to briefly mention out that, like, and also a common stereotype is that, like, a lot of people outside really think that, oh, homeless people really get the resource they need. But, like what Corey improved with his father going, that, they were treated really differently, So, like, not all homeless individual, really get the resource that they need. So that's also something I also want to point out.
Moving on, like my research about the topic of negative types about homeless people, that I did some research, and then I found this website that did polling and voting about how people perceive homelessness. And it states that 84% of the respondents, so people who voted, viewed homelessness as a serious issue, which is really good because we're able to see that people recognize homelessness as a big issue, not something to overlook. And also that um, 74, 74% of homelessness is expected to increase within the next year. And from previous polls and experience, it from previous experience and other polls, that compared to last year, the year before that, it had gone up 62% within the previous year, up to the most recent polling, which was of last year, which is unfathomable because even though people see um, homelessness as a serious issue, like a really big issue, nobody is doing anything about it to prevent it from going up. And a lot of these surveys found that almost half, about half, around 49%, think homelessness is like their circumstances is beyond the individual who is homeless's control. And 20% believe that It was from personal choice. And this is where we can see the prejudice that people think that, like we mentioned earlier, that it's the people's fault for them being homeless, which clearly it's not, because there are so many factors that come into people becoming homeless, or they're unable to control their situation. So it's, to me, it's a little crazy that 20% of these people believe that these unhoused individuals is their fault. Like, I don't know about you guys. You can do what you think.
No, yeah, I completely agree with that. Then, like, I think there's a lot of misinformation. There's a lot of fears about, you know, finding a solution to homelessness and homelessness in general. Um, a professor that I talked to, he, when I asked him a similar question, like, why do people not, why is there not enough being done about homelessness? Why do people seem so reluctant to actually do anything about homelessness, even though they know that it's a problem? And he said something like it's about a sort of a sense of NIMBYism, and NIMBY just means not in my backyard. So it's this sense of like you don't want the issue to be closely related to you or closely connected to you, if that makes sense. So like the sense of NIMBYism in the case of homelessness would be like, say for example, you're gonna build a shelter like right down your neighborhood, and some people don't want to live right next to a homeless shelter, for safety reasons, for maybe like they don't want their property, or is it the value of the property to go down because they live right next to a homeless shelter. And not a lot of people want, maybe just not a lot of people want to live next to a homeless shelter for whatever reason. I think that's a very true statement. I think a lot of people don't want to admit that they would like to help, but to be they just don't want to have that help be connected to them in some way where it affects their personal life, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. It's like understandable that these people don't, they may not want to live around people who are homeless, like you said, because of those factors. But when you think about it, it like kind of boils down to them being like willfully ignorant, and um a lot of prejudice. But we can also look at these statistics from this website that I looked at. It was the homelessnessimpact.org, and how the public perceives homelessness, and that they think 50%, around 50%, so it's actually 53% of homeless people struggle with drug alcohol dependency. That's what the public thinks. That's what people think. This is their prejudice. That's what they want to believe. In actuality, the rates of homeless people who are struggling with alcohol and drug dependency is actually really low. It's 5 to 7%. And they also think um, that 34% of these homeless individuals are immigrants, and that they're homeless because they illegally got there or some shit like that. Oh, sorry for my language. But in actuality, from that 34% that the public believes, it's only 14% that are actually immigrants, whether it be legal or illegal, that are seeking assistance outside of whether it be the US, California, and whatnot, or any other big countries like Canada, UK, like anywhere like that. And they think that, like, in the US, they think that these homeless individuals, like, they are, the rates are lower. So probably around like, um, I'm sorry, they think that around 12-ish% of people, like residents within the United States, like California specifically, they think that 12% is homeless. The out of the total population of California, they think 12% is homeless. It's actually more. 18% of Californians, so people who live in California, are homeless, and that rate is going up more than ever because of so many factors. Um, high living rates, the um, the high cost of living, and it's going up because no shade, all the shade actually, because of Trump and because of these tariffs, all the things that make the cost of living go up. And it's just going to keep increasing, which is going to in turn increase the rate of homelessness in California, especially. And nobody is really doing anything to provide help for these individuals. And it's getting even more difficult to help them because of high cost of living, because of high rates of like how much it costs to buy a home, an apartment, um, anything similar to that. Maybe like a motel, a hotel. Like it costs so much money just to maintain that living space. And imagine having to maintain not just that living space, but food. You have to maintain your work. But then some people don't even get paid enough to even pay for rent, food. Like if you have family members on top of that to support like children, it's even more difficult. And if you guys have any opinions, you can go ahead and say them because that's information that I got that I received from doing my research.
Yeah, I think it's nice to hear that you're so passionate about this. And I don't want to get too political either, but I do think that our government needs to lead by an example. They need to really start pushing back against the sort of like lack of what is it, like this lack of importance regarding homelessness, this lack of urgency, because I think I think once the government starts to set the example, I mean, we've seen multiple times in, especially in this current administration where, there's worries about the military, there's worries about public safety, worries about, censorship of media and information. And it's, I think the government just needs to put the right issues out on the forefront, and we need to start coming together as an entire nation to start looking inwards and say what is it that we're not doing right inwards instead of trying to focus on everybody else's other issues, and start leading by example to say, okay, if the beds are not the best solution, what are we missing? What are the missing links? Because there's multiple. And I just think we're not hitting the target where it can eradicate a lot of people's homelessness issues and concerns. And I would like to quote from the Sacramento Christ J podcast. It's episode 28, titled Social Work as Social Justice, Working with Unhoused Women. And it's specifically an episode about the executive director of Wellsprings Women's Center down in Sacramento. They're a nonprofit organization, and it's about the work that she does helping Wellspring and homeless women and children. And something that Dr. Arturo Bayaki said towards the end of the podcast really stood out to me, and I would like your guys' opinion on this. And I quote, I think our entire welfare apparatus is so unwelcoming, and it comes with a lot of gatekeeping and making sure that if people are getting help, they know that they shouldn't be getting help, and they have to prove their worthiness multiple times continuously. End quote. Any thoughts?
Yeah.
Yeah, like, oh, you can go first, Evan. My
Yeah, going back to the charts, I think that that displays how ignorant some people and how a lot of the population is uneducated about how bad the issue of homelessness really is, because these charts show that people tend to downplay certain issues and inflate other issues. So p- this that could affect the general population's unwillingness to help these individuals.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with all of you guys because like I said, um people have these prejudice, they have these like preconceived thoughts, and like you said, I forgot the word for it, but if it's not in my backyard, I'm not gonna care about it. Word, I don't remember what you said. What was it?
No, yeah, you're right. You're on the right track. NIMBYism, not in my backyard.
Yeah, like they don't want to care about it because it's not their business, but they know about it. Like they clearly know it's an issue, they clearly know it's a problem, but they don't want to do anything about it unless it's happening right in front of them. So the willingness for people who are not in these situations to actually help people who are in these situations like are really low because they think that since it's not their problem, they shouldn't have to deal with it or they shouldn't need to help these people.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think, like you said too, it plays into a lot of the prejudices, on both sides. Like how, oh, if you're not homeless, and it's not your biggest issue. Whereas if you're homeless, it's literally your biggest issue, and yet you feel like maybe you can't help yourself, or you shouldn't get help because it's so complicated, and maybe you deserve to be where you're at. But you know, really prejudices are just, they're human made, they're man made. It's not innate, and it's not a label for somebody to die with. If that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. As we bring this topic to a close, we we really need to realize that like we need to be more empathetic. We need to be more compassionate about people in these situations. We can't just say that, oh, since it's not happening right in front of me, since it's not happening right in my backyard, that we shouldn't care about it, that we shouldn't assist or help these people in need. Corey?
All right. As we wrap up this episode of Homeless in Sacramento, we reflect on the stories shared and the insights gained about the complexities of homelessness in our city. Addressing this issue requires compassion, informed action, and community collaboration. We encourage you to stay engaged, seek out local organizations that are making a difference, and consider how you can create a more inclusive and supportive Sacramento. Together, we can work toward meaningful solutions and offer hope to those in need. Thank you for tuning in to Homelessness in Sacramento. We encourage you to take action, whether by volunteering, supporting local initiatives, or simply extending kindness to those in need. Together, we can take we can make a meaningful difference. Stay safe, stay compassionate. Until next time, take care.
Are we